let's look at the counterfeits. We've talked about these in the timeline earlier. Let me show you again. If we have a trumpet at Passover, the world calls that what? Easter. If we have a trumpet on Feast of Trumpets, the world calls that what? Halloween. And of course, if we have a trumpet on the Jewish Hanukkah, the world calls that what? Christmas. Christmas, Easter, and Halloween. There, if you look in the book of Revelation, it tells you there are 3 unclean spirits like frogs that go out and gather everybody to the battle of Armageddon. Those 3 frogs, one application of those unclean spirits, are these pagan names of these holidays. Now, the reason why they're called unclean and not forbidden, God did not forbid anybody to do this. They're called unclean because these are actually God's appointed days, but Satan has hijacked them and changed the names of them. And that's what makes them unclean, okay? So when we talk about 3 unclean spirits like frogs, he's referring to Christmas, Easter, and Halloween. He's making reference to the 3 times a year that the Jewish men were required to appear in Jerusalem before God. Jesus said he would come like a thief in the night. Now, this is where it's very important to study with a King James Bible and not the other versions. Not that there's anything wrong with reading a couple of the other ones like I mentioned before, but sometimes when they rewrite the Bible, they change these words. And Jesus chose these words for a reason, okay? You read these other Bibles and it says Jesus is coming quickly, or he's coming swiftly, or he's coming soon, okay? Jesus meant to call himself or compare himself to a thief. He did that for a reason. And the reason he did that is because there's hidden revelation in the word thief. We saw a thief hanging on the cross beside Jesus on Passover. In the ancient Jewish wedding, the groom would come and get his bride like a thief in the night. And if you think about it, who else comes like a thief in the night? Santa Claus. Breaking into people's houses in the middle of the night. You see what I'm saying? Okay, Jesus was referencing Christmas when he said that. I come like a thief in the night. Well, once again, Easter, Halloween, and Christmas. Christmas, Easter, Halloween. We keep seeing that over and over and over. Okay, Jesus made some hidden references to the 3 days of darkness. Well, that's pretty obvious. Passover. Okay, Jesus hung on the cross. He was in the tomb for 3 days. All right. We also have 3 days of darkness in Egypt right before Moses brought the Israelites out. All right. Where else do we see 3 days of darkness? Well, in the ancient Jewish times, whenever they would celebrate the Feast of Trumpets, they didn't do it on God's calendar day like they were supposed to. They actually looked for the sighting of the new moon. And they would blow the trumpet for the new moon festival, but that would also become their Feast of Trumpets when the new moon came out in the 7th month on the 1st day. So, somehow their tradition got mixed in with God's feast day. And we know that the moon will go into its cycle where it will die for 3 days. So we have 3 days of darkness with the moon at Feast of Trumpets at the beginning of the month, or every month actually. Well, what they call a month, what God calls a month is 30 days, a cycle of 30 days. What they call a month is a cycle of the moon, and that's not what God told them to do. God told us to number our days, not our nights. Okay? Got to go by the solar calendar. And then the third 3 days of darkness, there's one more hidden reference to 3 days of darkness. Every year on December the 21st, the sun, because it's at its lowest point, the sun disappears, the S-U-N, okay? It disappears out of sight for 3 days. And it's said that the sun dies for 3 days and then resurrects again on December 25th. So if this is our earth and the sun's out here, we know that as we rotate around the sun changes position. Okay? So the sun comes down here, it's dark for 3 days, and then it resurrects and starts going back up, according to our view. Okay? This is why we see the sun setting at different locations throughout the year. So the third set of 3 days of darkness that we see is Christmas time. So once again, there's your Easter, your Halloween, and your Christmas. Christmas, Easter, Halloween. So how does any of that help us eliminate or figure out the timing of when Jesus will come back? So let's go to John chapter 10, starting at verse 22. I told you that the book of John was written for the Gentile bride. And here we're going to see something very, very interesting. Okay? Starting at verse 22. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication. It was Hanukkah. And it was winter. He made a point to tell us that it was winter. In Israel, they only have 2 seasons. They only have summer and winter. Their summer ends on Halloween, October 31st. Their winter begins November the 1st. Okay? Another reason he's telling us that is because on the Gentile system, winter begins on December 21st. That's going to play a key role in what I'm about to show you. Now, verse 23, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. So the Jews are coming up to him. They're, giving him a hard time. They're accusing him of blasphemy. All right? And Jesus goes on to say, why are you taking up stones against me? Why are you trying to kill me with stones? I've done many good works in my Father's name. And he goes on to defend himself and say, look, why are you doing this to me? I'm doing good things. Okay? And then if you get to verse 39, therefore they sought again to take him, but he escaped out of their hand. Right there. He escaped. What I tell you a while ago, that word escaped was going to be very important. That is a reference to rapture, because the rapture is an escape from the Antichrist. Okay? Then, if you read on into the rest of chapter 10 and into chapter 11, you're going to run into the story of Lazarus. Lazarus is the one who died, and Jesus didn't resurrect him until 4 days later. Okay? So what happened was Jesus escaped from the Pharisees, the Jews, at Hanukkah, and it was wintertime, and he went and stayed with John in the wilderness. Now, this is not the same John who wrote the book. This is John the Revelator who wrote the book. John the Baptist is the one he stayed with in the wilderness. Okay? Where John was baptizing. So here we have another parallel to Egypt, where Jesus escapes. He goes and stays in the wilderness, and then resurrecting Lazarus, is a type and shadow of entering the promised land, because he healed all the Israelites before they entered into the promised land. Now here's where things get interesting. Even though Jesus escaped at Hanukkah and it was winter time, we know that Hanukkah and tabernacles are interchangeable. Okay? We know, and I'll show you this later, we know that Moses escaped from Egypt at tabernacles. He went out into the wilderness for 40 years, and he later reappeared at Passover back in Egypt. And that's what we see here. We see Jesus escaping. He goes and stays in the wilderness probably for 40 days. And then we see the resurrection of Lazarus sometime during this stay in the wilderness. And then we later see Lazarus reappear at Passover, having dinner with his family. So, because Hanukkah and tabernacles are interchangeable, we're back to the same situation we had here with the ancient Jewish wedding. It could be a celebration at tabernacles or Hanukkah, either one. And here again, this is interchangeable because of the story of Moses, where he escaped at tabernacles. He met met God in the burning bush at Hanukkah. I'm going to show you that later. And then he went back to Egypt to confront Pharaoh at Passover. So once again, we have this open-ended question. Is it going to be tabernacles, the Jewish Hanukkah, or God's true Hanukkah? This is interchangeable with tabernacles. We have this reference to it being winter, referencing the December 21st, which is referencing, those 3 days of darkness. Are these the 3 days that Lazarus was in the grave? Is Jesus referencing the fact that he resurrected Lazarus on December 25th, while he was staying with John in the wilderness for 40 days to God's true Hanukkah? Okay? So we don't know which one he's referring to because they're all interchangeable. So here he's referencing Christmas, which is the Jewish Hanukkah. We know that's interchangeable with God's tabernacles, and he's also referencing God's true Hanukkah. So once again, like I said, we're left with an open-ended question. This is going to come into play here soon. Now, if we look at the actual wording in John chapter 10, we're going to see that Jesus was talking about God's true Hanukkah, January 24th through the 31st. He went and stayed in the wilderness, which is a reference to 40 days, and then he waited 4 days to get Lazarus. So that brings you to around March 16th or 17th. This is our spring equinox, 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night. And Jesus made that reference in the scripture. He said, are there not 12 hours in a day? So he was telling us when he resurrected Lazarus. But let's not forget that we're looking at symbolism here where Hanukkah and tabernacles are interchangeable. And let's not miss that point.